Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for being here for what I think is going to be a very interesting and certainly very informative announcement. Before we go, I just want to thank Chief Isom and the men and women of the St. Louis Police Department for all the good work they do. And to my right and to your left, we have some of the best talent in law enforcement anywhere in the country, and we're certainly very proud of all of them and all the work that they do. I've witnessed firsthand a lot of the things that they do, and I can tell you as mayor and as a law-abiding citizen of this community, I'm very, very grateful for all your service. We're here today to report the results of the Homicide Deterrence Initiative, what we learned and what we're going to do in the future to help make our city even safer. The simple fact is the initiative worked, and it worked very well. And you're going to hear in a moment from some people who are going to talk more about that. When we focus the resources on where the crime is occurring at the time the crime is occurring, we were getting very good results. This is in a form of hotspot policing. We plan to continue it, we plan to expand it, and we want to do it in an even more targeted and a more sustainable way. I want to congratulate the chief for the effectiveness of the strategy and for his leadership, and thank him. And I certainly want to thank again the men and women of the police department who night after night engage dangerous criminals, some of the most dangerous criminals in our city. In some cases they prevent crimes from happening to begin with. In other cases they arrest these thugs and get them off the streets of our city. And that's what the police department is supposed to do, and that's what they're doing every day. They do a dangerous job, and they're doing it extraordinarily well, and I'm very proud of them. They deserve our tremendous thanks and all of our support. You're about to hear from Chief Isom himself in just a moment, from Emily Blackburn of the department's Crime Analysis Unit, from Rick Rosenfeld of University of Missouri's Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice, and from Lieutenant Colonel Larry O'Toole, who is a commander of community policing for the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. Lieutenant Colonel Larry O'Toole will talk, among other things, about the department's follow-up plans. The potential of this initiative to make our neighborhood safer and get more thugs off our street is remarkable. We are using new strategies that we believe will be effective. We are also evaluating them and using independent eyes to look at that to make sure that we're using taxpayers' money in the most efficient way. Through our public safety partnership, we formed earlier this year. Top scholars and analysts are independently measuring what's working and what's not. We will expand on those strategies that work, and we will throw out those that do not. I am grateful to Chief Isom and to the men and women of the department, as I said, and to University of Missouri's Department of Criminology for all their commitment to making St. Louis neighborhoods, every St. Louis neighborhood, safe. St. Louisans should be very proud of this excellent police work and the public service. So without any further ado, I will allow Chief Isom to take the microphone.
First I want to say thank you to Colonel O'Toole, the captains, and also Lieutenant Moore for their leadership in this HDI initiative. Certainly moving 100 officers from day watch to evening watch, working 6 to 2 for 30 days was a burden on these officers and their families. And this would not have worked if it weren't for the leadership of the captains who are here today. But as most of you all are aware, over the course of this year, the captains and everyone on the police department has been working very hard to try to reduce the aggravated assaults in the city of St. Louis. And so beginning in September, I decided to make a big change and shift a number of officers to evening watch. My crime analysis unit picked out several very narrowly defined hot spots, and these officers were supposed to stay in those areas and do targeted enforcement in those areas. It's safe to say that it worked, and it worked very, very well. As I said, that's due to the leadership of these captains and the men and women of the St. Louis Police Department. So I really want to say thank you for them for taking this challenge on, knowing that it was a burden to them, but they did their mission well. So I thank them for that. Now I will turn it over to Emily Blackburn and also Rick Rosenfeld to give you some information on the results of this initiative.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We want to go very briefly through kind of the guts of this evaluation. As the Chief mentioned, 12 areas in the city were selected by crime analysis in the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department based on the incidence and concentration of serious firearm violence in those areas. Patrols were enhanced during peak crime hours in those areas, and in some cases, vehicle checkpoints were used, and other strategies were used throughout those 12 areas. The intervention lasted 1 month, and our evaluation strategy was fairly straightforward. First of all, we compared the crimes in the HDI areas during the intervention with crime trends in the non-HDI areas over the same period the previous year, during the prior month, the month prior to HDI, and the 12-month average in those areas, the previous 12-month average. Emily Blackburn and her staff also did what I think is a very intriguing analysis. They compared crime trends during the evenings and nights, the peak crime hours, with crime trends during the daytime in the HDI areas, and we'll summarize the results of both of those evaluations. Here are the HDI areas. I'm not going to linger on this. If you'd like to get this in greater detail, we can provide it after the press conference. Suffice to say, these areas are spread across the city, north, south, and central. Here are our major results. We observed a 68% reduction in the so-called target crimes. Those are the crimes that were targeted by this initiative: homicide, non-domestic firearm assault, and firearm robbery. 68% reduction over the same period during the previous year. Also a 68% reduction over the prior month, the month prior to the HDI intervention, and a 64% reduction over the average crime count in the HDI areas during the 12 previous months. In the non-HDI areas, for comparison, we saw a 12% reduction over the same period of 2011, a 7% reduction over the prior month, and a 12% reduction over the prior 12-month average. So crime was going down even in the non-HDI areas, but as you can see, crime was going down at a rate 5 times or more faster in the HDI areas. Now, other crimes. These are not the target crimes, but other violent crimes, including non-firearm robbery, non-firearm assault, and rapes. What we see there are smaller reductions in the HDI areas compared to the other areas, but I think still important reductions. Here's a visual that I think captures the effectiveness of this intervention. What we saw is these so-called target crimes were coming down at the beginning of the 12-month period, and then we saw that increase that all of us, I think, were paying attention to, flattened out a little over the summer, and then a major decline after HDI began. And we can compare that with crime trends in other areas of the city not targeted by HDI, and as you can see, those trends were similar to the trends in the HDI areas until the intervention began. Then we see that marked decline in HDI, and we see the more modest decline in the non-HDI areas. Emily?
And this is just an example of a map that we do weekly here at the SLMPD. Certainly this was enhanced hotspot policing, but that's something we do every week and pay attention to on a regular basis. But what you can see there is some green and yellow dots or squares, and those are the specific areas that we focused on for HDI. So we've kind of spelled it out, but that's a visual representation of that. And what this map shows is that there are densities. There's always going to be a density of crime in a city, but there's no real hotspots citywide, and in particular right now we've cooled off in those HDI areas. So this is the week prior, the prior week, the week after HDI ended, and we're still seeing sustained benefits. The citywide, we don't have a lot of crime going on right now, and in particular in those areas that we focused on, we've got a lot less crime. There's not hardly any density in those areas. So that's a very positive thing that we have.
So our conclusion is that HDI was effective in reducing serious firearm violence. The reductions in the target crimes in the HDI areas were substantially greater than in the non-HDI areas. We saw smaller, but I think still important reductions in other crimes. And the challenge is to sustain crime reductions over time with available resources, and Colonel O'Toole is going to talk about that challenge.
Thank you, Doctor, Mayor, Chief. First, let me just say that this initiative was very successful, but it was because of the tremendous efforts put forth by the patrol officers and detectives on our department. But even more than that, it was the sacrifices that they made and their families made. The change of hours, to move from what they normally were accustomed to work these hours, it was a burden to some of the officers and their families. So I can't stress that enough. And I appreciate the mayor and the chief and everybody recognizing that. The other people who were very instrumental in this are the commanders here. And I asked them to be here today, and the chief agreed that they should be here because these commanders, one, those officers work for these commanders here, and they kept the officers on point, but they also made those accommodations that needed to be made in the families to ensure that they could still do what they needed to do with their families. So these commanders are the ones who deserve a great deal of credit. Every week, every Thursday, we go through CompStat, and we go and analyze crime. You wouldn't believe, I mean, the map that Emily showed you is a map that we do every Thursday, and even sometimes on a daily basis when we're watching the crime trends as we go through. But as the professor stated, it's hard to continue this. The city, they've allocated another $250,000 to the police department for overtime for us to continue this. So it's we're looking for how do we continue this success. Over the next 30 to 45 days, what we're planning on is, as you know, the city of St. Louis is broken into 3 patrol areas: the North Patrol Area, the Central, and the South Patrol areas. Each area has 3 captains, 3 districts. We've asked each area to come up with a strategy, a specific strategy for the crime in their area. And we're going to use those strategies and allocate roughly $50,000 to each area. And at the end of 30 days, working with the UMSL and crime analysis, we're going to analyze and evaluate and measure exactly what happened. Based upon that, we're going to take it and try to continue implementing those strategies, not only with the overtime, but with on-duty personnel as well. We're fortunate here because it's October. In our business, it's a good time of the year because we're going to start getting into some cooler months, and we're going to benefit from that. However, with that said, we know historically that we can expect holiday trends. We know that there are, at the holiday times, that we can experience street robberies and other crimes of opportunity. And so after the 30 days, we're still going to have overtime money available. We're going to take that money, implement the strategies that are most successful that we've seen in each of these areas, take that along with what we know historically, what we've seen with the holiday trends, utilize that for holiday patrols in our neighborhoods, and continue the success. So it's... I wish criminology was a perfect science. It's not. It's challenging, but I can tell you that with our crime analysis unit and actually now partnering with UMSL, I think that we can really analyze our crime and measure our success. We need to be very prudent with our decisions and how we spend the taxpayers' money, and that's what we plan on doing. So at this point, if there's any questions. Well, again, you know, we had the benefit historically. Our CompStat has been going on with our crime analysis unit 5 years. So we have the benefit of being able to go back and look at things historically and predict based upon the patterns and trends. We're going to continue now as we go with the weather. but we'll be able to predict along that. Hey, we're going to, if we have to, as the map showed, this isn't something that just came up. We identified aggravated assaults were trending on high starting in February. All the captains here, we developed persons of interest lists, those people who we know are known criminals in our communities and throughout the city, and we began targeting them and doing different strategies then. So it was on our radar early on. Just like last year, as we know, as we sat here, burglaries were on the rise. We took effective steps with all the captains working together, developed strategies, and our burglaries declined greatly. Same thing with our larcenies. We continue to do those things with the larcenies. One of the strategies that we did here was, because of larcenies, if you recall, the car clottings and so forth, we started several years ago that officers would respond on every car break-in. Now you can imagine that takes an officer out of patrol for a while. One of the initiatives that we put in place early on with the HDI was we no longer had officers responding on that our telephone reporting unit would take those minor crimes. I say minor, it's not minor when it's your car that got broken into or your car that somebody stole. But if the citizens insist upon a police officer will respond. But by taking those types of reports over the phone, property crime reports over the phone, we're able to save time and keep officers on patrol. We're going to continue that strategy going forward.
Moved 100 officers under this new thing. Numbers still going to have 100 officers that were out, fewer officers that are working with crime going on.
Well, I'd have to crunch the numbers, but I would say roughly, 50. We figured that was half of our overlay officers that we took who would normally be working. We call it the overlay shift, which is a 10 a.m. to 6 and a 6 to 2. Well, we took them away from their 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. shift and shifted them all to work together 6 to 2. So,
100 at night,
well, now that we're going back, we'll have 50 less because we're putting those officers back on their regular daytime patrols.
but 50 last time we had people.
Yes, yes. There were a number of different strategies that were employed during this. A number of checkpoints that were set up, safety checkpoints in the hot spots. High patrolling in these areas. Our RDU unit, our rapid deployment unit was up there. In many of these neighborhoods, they had their own zones. So, it was a zero tolerance type of policing that you hear about. So there were a number of different strategies that were employed throughout the city. Well, we know that when we do certain patrols and when we concentrate in an area, that we know that we're gonna move some crime. And we know that we benefited, actually that's what our study showed, is we actually benefited in the areas that weren't targeted. The crime went down. Despite criminals, they can see when we're out there too. So like I said, it's not a perfect science, but those are the peak hours that we look at. So I don't want you to think, hey, those maps are developed for us to base our patrolling on, to know that, hey, these are the best times that so far during that time period, that's when it was the most active, and that's what we have to look at. Well, we hope not, but the reality is that criminals are criminals. The people that we're targeting in this initiative, I can tell you that they are some of the worst of the worst. And they don't go to work. Their jobs are being career criminals. And I can tell you that we're very fortunate here because our prosecutor, our circuit attorney's office, and our judges have seen that, and they've responded well to that.
Well, first of all, law enforcement, public safety is our #1 priority. It always will be our priority. There's really nothing else matters if you don't feel safe in your own home, and there's nothing that irritates me and everybody in this room more than a selfless a thug who doesn't care about anybody else, victimizing innocent victims in our community. So what we've done is, and we've shown, is this police department's been our number one budgetary priority, and will continue to be our #1 budgetary priority. One of the things that I work towards in order to help make this happen is transferring some funds from another department into the police department to make it work. And then, we've got to be using the resources that we have. We have to keep looking at how we're using them and make sure we're using them in the most effective way. I was talking to the chief about, potentially, well, one of the things that happens when you, and I'm not the law enforcement guy, but when you catch these criminals and you take them off the streets, then they're not going to be committing crimes, at least until they get, if they get back out. And one of the things we can do is maybe talk to the chief about this potential is you do a strategy for a period of time, and then when it's working and you're showing that you had, then maybe you go back to what you were doing and then come back maybe the next month, so that, in other words, you switch your strategies around to be most effective and use your resources in the best way. But that's something these guys are going to figure out. But no, we've got limited resources, but this department has a $172 million budget, and we've got other resources within government that we're going to make sure that we make the best use of, so that we can help each one of these men and women in the department. We need to make sure that they have the resources they need to do their jobs, and the people in our city have the resources, and we use taxpayers in the most effective way to make it safer. So I'm committed to making sure the resources are there. I know the chief is, and I'm sure the men and women here to my right are going to be looking for all the help that we can give them, and we're going to give it to them.
Well, we haven't exactly decided if that's what we're going to use as a strategy. What I will say, and we've indicated that this was a strain on people's families' lives and their personal lives. So, we understand that officers were upset that they had to switch shifts, and, maybe we'll do it a different way next time. In the MOU, or in the agreement, it says that, and that's the disagreement, that we're supposed to give 30 days notice. So maybe next time we'll give 30 days notice, and we give people the time to prepare and change their schedules so they can work this 30-day notice. But there is the possibility that we could give a 30-day notice, and we could do it again 2 or 3 months down the road when the residual effect of what we're doing right now goes away. So there's a number of different ideas. We've got some really smart, bright commanders here who can figure this out and give us a lot of different possibilities and strategies on how we could sustain this, and I think they'll do that. I think this is a template for reducing crime, and there will be a number of different ways in which they'll use this to make sure that we have the same impact.
Because there is thought to permanently reschedule a sufficient number of officers for crime in 1 hour, so that it's not overtime, it's a regular 8-hour shift. But that's when all the bad guys get out of bed.
Well, over time, I think that's something that the police department could look at as well. So, right. I understand. What we did find, though, not a major uptick, but there was, and the captains brought this to us, they felt a little bit of strain in terms of providing service during the day. So we don't want to diminish that fact as well, because the captains are out there on the street every day and they see what's going on. And so we did have a slight uptick in property crime during the daytime hours. We don't know how long, if we had kept this going, how bad that would have gotten. So So the story is not all rosy about moving 100 or so officers to evening watch. So those are things that we have to consider too. The other issue is we looked at response time. It did go up just a little bit as a result of moving these officers to night watch. So it's not just as easy as let's put 100 people on 6 to 2 forever, because there's other considerations. But I think over time, you know, looking at all those things and trying to determine maybe there are some people we could put at these permanent times, but I think it's something to look at in the future.
Next question, a dramatic result the first 30 days. Do you expect that the whole
But we're going to try.
what do you think?
Well, we got 3 different strategies that the captains have come up with. We've evaluated the first strategy, and we're going to look at those, and if those work, if it's decided that the money that the city gave us, the $250,000, will sustain these decreases, then, you know, that's another part of the mix of strategies that we have to look at long-term on how to maintain these reductions. So, you know, all the decisions are not made. This is sort of the first step, first round. It looks good, and then we'll move on.
One thing to be sure, we have some of the best minds right here in this room as far as law enforcement, and we're going to do whatever it takes with the resources that we have, and making sure we have all the respect and consideration of the men and women who are out there doing the tough work to make this work for the people of St. Louis. I mean, that's our commitment, and I think this is a great partnership, and we've got a good team to implement the strategies here. So I feel good about it, but you know what? Again, as the Lieutenant Colonel was saying, O'Toole, this is not an exact science. You know, we can't sit here and we don't got a magic ball, or we don't have a magic wand, a crystal ball or magic wand, but we do have a lot of people who are committed to working together with the resources that we have to make this work for the people of St. Louis, to make it safer, and to give the support that the men and women of this department need and deserve.